All right, and we are live and want to welcome everybody to the other side of the die where we discuss how you can have, let me actually turn, I'm hearing myself. Hang on one second, Jeremy. There we go. All right, where you can just we discuss how you can have less drama and more fun at your gaming table. And I just want to tell you about our socials. You can reach us on Twitter at Other Side Die. That's Other Side Die. No the, no of, just Other Side Die. Or if you're old school, you can send us an email at othersidedie@gmail.com. We stream every other Sunday starting at 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time, and we will go until Jeremy and I run out of things to talk about. So I'm one of your hosts, Paul Postal.
And I'm Jeremy Kimberlin. Again, kind of what he talked about real quick is a lot of this is always going to assume how to have the most fun at your tables. This week, we are going about how to avoid misunderstanding at your table. It's going to be the main topic we're going over. Paul, you do have a little bit of background in this. We're kind of going to touch on assuming positive intent to begin with. So, what's your background in this field?
So I do have an undergrad in human relations because many moons ago, when I started on my undergrad in 2010, I had the intent to become a licensed practicing counselor and wanted to help people develop their self-awareness, help them avoid misunderstandings in their relationships, and ultimately decided not to go that route. I went on to get a master's degree in human resources management, and I'm a professional trainer. And for a living, I train people in operational training, but I also train them on soft skills exactly like this. So that's kind of my background and my credentials in this area.
Yeah. So we actually, I'm not going to say we actually have some information on this. It's a lot more Paul, and I'm just going to be sharing some stories that I feel like really apply some of this. So
Yeah.
what's that? The first one, which is assuming positive intent.
Yeah, so assuming positive intent is really powerful, and this can go a long way to avoiding misunderstandings at the gaming table. And really, assuming positive intent, all it really means is that whatever anybody says or does, you assume that they meant well. And you
Yeah.
assume that they had most positive intent possible. And that's really it in a nutshell. Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I know my wife and me, we've done marriage counseling. We try to do it every so often just to
Mhm.
stay healthy. And this is a real big one in marriage counseling. It's just really important and can make your not just your gaming, which is what we're focused on here, but it
Right.
can make a lot of your relationships a lot stronger once
Absolutely.
you start to do this.
Absolutely. You are spot on, Jeremy. And this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. I really hate to see misunderstandings that could have been easily corrected if people had just taken the time to slow down and assume some positive intent. Actually, I just noticed we do have somebody in the chat. Just want to recognize Reaper. I'm not sure how to pronounce the rest of that. Merrick's, is that how you would say that? I don't know if you're looking at the chat, Jeremy, but
I'm looking at it. So that's one of my players that I play with on another day. So woo,
okay.
thanks for supporting us, man.
Awesome. Okay, apparently I got it right because he said yes, sir. Okay, we're good. All right. So, Rupert, thanks for joining. I'm glad to have you in here. So, appreciate it. But along with assuming positive intent is the concept known as the fundamental attribution error. And that sounds like fancy terminology, but if you just break it down into its component parts, what the fundamental attribution error really is, it's um, how do I because there's so many different ways of actually looking at it. So
Yeah.
the most verbose way of looking at it is it's attributing mistakes that other people make to their character, where mistakes that you make you attribute it to your circumstances. Like for example, you're at work, somebody's late for a meeting. What's usually the first thing people say? "Ah, he's always late to meetings. You know what? He's such a slacker, or
Traffic.
he's
Yeah.
lazy." Right? Okay.
Yep.
But when you're late to a meeting, what do you blame it on? You blame it on the weather, or you blame it on
Hmm.
traffic, like you were just
Yep.
saying. So the thing is that it really isn't fair to ascribe a set of standards, one set of standards to yourself, and then ascribe a higher set of standards to somebody else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. That you're going to see that in the workplace far more than anything else. Just thinking of my own gaming experience and my own DMing style. Uh, so something that kind of comes into this is I've seen players get mad at each other.
Mhm.
So in my games, if you try to shoot at an enemy and you have an ally in your line,
Mhm.
the enemy actually is considered to have half coverage, which means they get a bonus to AC. So if you roll really low and you're shooting through an ally and roll a 1 or a 2, I will typically make that arrow hit your ally.
Right.
It makes it where if you have range, you can't just shoot at your allies and say, "Well, I'm a really good shot." It goes around that. There's feats to ignore it, and then I would never do that again. But when you don't have those feats, you're going to shoot an ally if you're shooting right past somebody to try to hit them on the other side. And I've seen players this right here, the fundamental attribute error, where
Mhm.
it's uh, one game, one player gets shot in the back due to a player not really thinking about it in the middle of combat, and they're like, oh, I forgot, oh my gosh. And the player that got shot is just absolutely upset and forgets that, 2 campaigns ago they were doing the same thing
Right.
when they were playing as the
Aha.
ranger. And it
Exactly.
was, yeah, and it was like, oh well, I didn't mean to shoot you, I was trying to help you. And this, and exactly, it's the circumstances are okay when I do it, but when you do it, it's your fault. The
Right.
circumstances don't matter.
You're a
Yeah,
bad
and
person. Right.
yeah, and it's one of those things you always want to try to think about it from the other person's perspective, and it's like, why might they have been late? Uh, and I know me and you are both Christians.
Mhm.
For me, a lot of it's give grace. You don't have to be a Christian to give grace, but
No, you
it's the
don't.
idea of try to be forgiving. Like try to think about what might have happened to cause make that person be late. When I work and stuff like that, I definitely always try to assume positive intent, which goes into fundamental error, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm assuming they meant to be here on time and something else happened.
Absolutely. And the number one thing to do is just stop and ask questions. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, for you,
Yep.
that's a great example that you had, Jeremy. There's been times that I've running games. I mean, you've run games more than I have, so you probably have many more stories than I do. But think about this. I'm just taking a look at my notes here. Here's a situation I jotted down. So, a player misunderstands something that the GM said, and they base a
Yeah.
decision on that. And then when the other players get mad at them for that decision, what does that player usually say? Well, don't blame me. If so and so had described it correctly,
Yeah.
and or when think about this, when another player makes a bad decision based on the GM's description, when you do it, you blame the GM. But
Yeah.
another player does it, makes a bad decision based on the GM's description of a room, then you blame it on that player and blame on the character. It's something like, why would you do that? You're so stupid. That was such a dumb decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the So this is going to be an episode for down the road at some point in time where we assume that it's not player versus DM on assuming positive intent. But again, that's going to be down the road. I think something that would be really important with the assuming positive intent aspect would be players' interactions with each other as well. Whenever one player does something, you have to assume that they're doing that for the correct reasons. Like they're not trying to hurt the party. Uh, and I think that would help out a lot of parties. Now there are going to be players out there that are doing something to try to damage what is going on with the
Right.
party, but more often than not, you should be trying to assume that positive intent and that they're not trying to ruin what is going on.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think the way to uncover that is if they're doing something, on purpose, whether to determine whether they're doing something on purpose or it really was an accident. It's like, what do we say to kids all the time when kids do something wrong and you keep saying, I'm sorry? At a certain point as a parent, you're going to reach a point where you're like, I don't want you to be sorry. I just want you to not do it anymore. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And so, with players, I think the way to determine if they did it on purpose or it's an accident is if the first time they do it and you talk to them and they apologize for it, say, hey, it's not going to happen again. If it keeps on happening, well, then, you realize that that's a very good indication that they're not doing it on accident. They're intending to do it. I just noticed that
yeah.
Reaper put a comment in there.
Yeah, I read it while you were talking, kind of half listening there.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
so he was talking about how kind of the assuming positive intent. So Reaper, our listener is watching this, and he's bringing up a thing where he just played in a one shot, and he was grappling an enemy, and one of the other PCs had to try to hit him while the Reaper was holding him, and the guy was worried about hitting him while he was holding the enemy,
Right.
and it did end up happening, and Reaper had to reassure him, hey, it's okay, we had a successful encounter. It was a risk that we took, but I assumed that you had the correct intentions and you were trying to help the party, not intentionally trying to hit me. And
Right.
that right there, just by assuming positive intent, it makes the game fun. He reassured the player and they continued playing. And I feel like that would have been a really memorable encounter where it's you're holding an enemy as somebody else is beating them down. Like that's a memorable encounter.
Yep.
And having that tension, which I'm going to bring up a lot as well, is to have an exciting game, you need tension. The tension there is you may hit your friend holding them. So that makes it really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm spot on with what you're saying. I'm tracking with you, and absolutely, Reaper, I agree with your comment. And it's good that the guy felt bad. And you think about if you're in a group in that situation, you have somebody who, like Reaper, who does not assume positive intent. You know what? That can go sideways
Yeah,
because
all
be
of a
like,
sudden you have the conflict, and then all of a sudden, and I feel like whenever players have conflict, you can feel it, and it just tends to ruin the night.
yep. Absolutely. So good job, Reaper. What a fantastic way to assume that positive intent. So now another thing, a concept I want to bring up here, Jeremy, is I've read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and if nobody has read this book, everybody should be reading The 7 Habits. And I have facilitated trainings at work on this one. The first habit of the 7 Habits by Dr. Stephen Covey is being proactive. And I really latched onto this one. And one of the concepts he talks about in being proactive is we all have the capacity as adults to there's a stimulus, when something happens. Let's take Reaper's example here. He got hit with a beam. We all have the capacity to create space between the stimulus and our reaction. So the key is not to react right away. You know, take a few seconds, think about how you want to react. Don't just react right away. You know what? Like Reaper did. I'm sure Reaper probably took a few seconds and was like, okay, he didn't mean to hit me on purpose. It's okay. So he chose his reaction. Does that make sense? Kind of the way I explained that?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say I have a real big one pretty recently from one of my own games where I'm a player, and just a little bit of a backstory on it. I ended up my person has a really low intelligence. One of the players got stuck in a magical like jail cell, and I was trying to befriend the guard that we were infiltrating the area. So I bring the guard over, and things instantly start to get worse because I did so. I thought, hey, this guy is my friend. He'll help us out. That was wrong. It got worse. So I'm like, my guy is very dumb. I'm going to take this guard and we're just going to go away, and hopefully everybody else can figure this out. And the player, and kind of going to positive intent, the player didn't assume positive intent from that situation,
Hmm.
which started to lead into this next situation where he ended up getting a magical item and basically yeeted me 30 feet, and it made my person extremely mad because I'm this big Goliath and I've never been yeeted before. Uh, I think I would have attacked him had I stayed in character, but I despise PvP if it's not agreed upon.
Right.
I think, kind of going back to the other thing, it causes a lot of drama and a lot of bad stuff tends to happen. Right after this happened, my guy got in his face and was like, "Why'd you do that?" And like you could just feel the tension level start to go up, and it just was not fun. So I ended up trying to basically like, "Hey, this is the situation." I then let it go for the rest of the night. And then I actually waited 2 days before I brought it up in our chat system that we use to kind of discuss the situation, just to basically let me calm down and to figure it out. Yeah, yeah. Again, Reaper plays with me on Mondays, and he
Oh
was
yeah, I
there for
just saw
that.
his comment. He's like, that got really
Yeah,
intense.
yeah, and it's not fun. Like that situation wasn't fun. and kind of talking on a couple of these things, it was one of the players didn't assume positive intent. And then I tried to create space the second I realized things were getting out of hand, to let everybody kind of think about it. And yeah, and some of that kind of goes into the next subject that we are going to be talking about. Do you have anything else that you really want to say on creative space before I jump into the
Uh,
next thing?
no, 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 no. The only thing I was going to say was just, I was just going to give some examples of how you can
Yeah,
create that space. Some things that, people can say is whether you're a player or, you're a GM, if somebody does something or says something, instead of reacting immediately, one of the things you can say is like, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute. Why did you decide to do that? Okay, you're stopping a few seconds, creating that space. You're going to assume some positive intent. You're going to assume that they had a good reason for doing it, and just ask them. A lot of these, if people would just stop and ask questions instead of yelling and making statements, it would
yeah,
solve a lot of problems. If this is done right and you assume that positive intent and create that space, then you give the other player a chance to explain that decision. And then
yeah,
more than likely, you're going to realize there was a miscommunication, and then everybody can just talk it out. You know what? Talk it out, work it out, and then hopefully you can work it out within a couple minutes. The game can continue. If not, the best thing to do is just like, listen, let's just table this.
yep,
Well, like you did because you said you waited a couple of days,
yeah.
okay? And that was a lot of space that you created. So anyway,
Yeah, and
go
I,
ahead.
I, I mean, I think just going on that, a lot of things that end up happening in the game are going to be broken down into miscommunications. Uh, and you have to remember at the end of the day, everybody's here for the same thing. The whole reason you're getting around a table is to have fun.
Right.
The second you're not having fun, I think a lot of it is creating that space for a second, figure out why you're not having fun, and then see if you can figure out what you can start to do that. Now, there are things that are unfun in tabletop role playing games that I feel like some people don't have fun with, which is the really high tense situations. But that is what is creating fun, as long as it's not the players causing that outside of the game.
There you go. Spot on. So no, that's all I had on that one. So I know there was something you wanted to bring up, Jeremy. So go for
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I was gonna say I was wanting to bring up. I think one of the biggest things that we can do to really set up avoiding misunderstandings in the gaming sphere really is to bring up lines and veils in a session zero or even a pre-session zero. Uh, oh, here we go. Reaper's got something.
Yep. Yeah, he said in my games that I DM, I usually go over some of the intense situations in that session in a small after session talk. That's actually not a
Yeah,
bad idea.
yeah.
Yeah,
A
table
lot
it
of
until after the session. Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people do that. I always try to have where if there's a rules conflict, I'll try to tell people that, like, hey, let's not bog down the game with this rules. Like, let's not figure it out right now. Let's just, as the GM, this is what we're going to use for right now.
Yep.
And then after the game, let's dig in and figure out what the ruling should have been, and then we'll know that moving forward.
There you go.
I find is the best way because nothing uh puts people to sleep more than when one player and a GM start digging through the rules book to figure out how that one spell's supposed to act,
Yep.
and combat comes to an absolute halt. That puts everybody else to sleep and it ruins the fun, right? So let's just figure out a quick ruling for it, continue on, and let's put a note in it and come back afterwards. I think that helps a whole lot. After session talks, I love to do them.
Yep. I'm with you. Spot on with both you and Reaper. Yeah, so
Yeah.
go ahead about the lines and veils because when you
Yeah.
brought this up when we were preparing for this session, I was not familiar with this concept. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in hearing
So
this.
Lines and Veils popped up in the scene a couple years ago, and a lot of tables have started to use this. So just a little tidbit on what a line and a veil is. So a line, what it is basically you do not want the game to cross that line, right? You basically inform the GM, these are my lines and veils. And what a line may be is, sexual assault's a big one. Slavery is one that I've seen in a lot of games. Uh, Hurting children is one that I've had in most of my games, to support a couple of my players. So those are lines. Those are things that you do not do. You do not introduce them into the game. You don't hint at them. They're not in the game.
Yep.
That's a line. Then you have something that would be veils. So the same person that did not accept children being hurt in any way in the game,
Hmm.
what a veil may be, or what was acceptable, this wouldn't really be a veil, but what was acceptable to them is if they came across a ghost that was a child, right?
Yep.
That informs you that a child had passed away,
Yep.
but this was a ghost that you could use as a tool to help the players. And that was a really cool way to use something, but without crossing that line, right?
Makes sense.
So, basically no role playing actively of hurting the children, but it could be hinted at that it had happened, but you didn't show it. And what a veil is kind of on that same lines. A lot of people use a veil in romance, right?
Hmm.
I haven't been at a table where role playing romance really gets deep down. I don't think anybody wants that, right?
No.
That's kind of
No. No.
no, thank you. So a lot of times you get that fade to black, right? And that would be a veil. I've seen a lot of veils where it could go into like let's interrogate the person. All right, well let's fade to black, roll a 20, and we'll see how much information you got.
There you go.
That a player could have, I don't want torturing to be done just because it's too graphical for me and I don't enjoy that. So that could be a veil where maybe some of the other players, they really want to start chopping off fingers, but let's fade to black on that and just roll the dice and I'll give you the information that you would have gotten.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. I can understand both the line and I mean the line is pretty easy. These are just lines that you don't cross.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of players have a lot of the same lines because I'm with you. I don't want sexual assault in my games or any game that I play in. I don't want to see children or animals being hurt. Um, if it's implied, okay, I'm okay with that. I don't want it to. I don't. If it's part of the story, I'm okay with that. I do not want it to see it actively happen during a game. Veils, I'm with you on the romance one. That's a big one. I'm sorry. I don't feel like
Yeah.
as a GM role playing a female character who's being romanced by a male player that is just awkward. I don't want to do it. So if you're trying, if any player tries that, listen, okay, you know what? Just fade to black. You know what?
Yeah.
Go off on your date or whatever
Yeah.
you're doing, fade to black. I'm trying to keep this G rated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Uh,
yeah,
I
I'm right
had
there with you.
I had a couple. It was a boyfriend girlfriend that were in my game for a little bit, and yeah, sometimes they were kind of blurring that line of, "Hey guys,
Yeah,
this is a veil kind of topic. Uh, I'm glad that you two are dating, but I don't want to hear every 15 minutes in the game that you two want to make out. Like
right.
that, I don't need that. That doesn't help me in the game. I don't even think it's helping you in the game.
No,
Uh, it's just
no.
a weird, you know, let's just veil that. Uh yeah, so
I'm just looking at Reaper again. I usually
yeah.
utilize those situations for a kidnapping or something of the sort.
Yeah, a lot of
Okay.
times you could see veils. You may see a veil in that situation. I may let the player try to fight off the kidnapping. But if it's a loved one or something like that being kidnapped, I would probably veil that as well, just because that could be really
Yep.
emotional. So yeah, I may veil a kidnapping of a loved one in the game. Uh, so and kind of going into lines and veils, I feel like a lot of times the best way to do this is to uh not say it in your group like, hey, this is from Jeremy, this is my lines and veils. That I don't think that's a healthy way to do it. I think one of
No.
the best ways to do it is you send all of your lines and veils to the storyteller, the game master, whoever's running the game, and then on your session zero, I think the lines and veils need to be done almost beforehand, and then
Hmm.
when you show up to session zero, it's, hey everybody, these are the lines that we're not going to cross, and these are the topics that we'll probably veil. And don't feel afraid in the middle of a sorry, burp there, in the middle of a campaign to feel like you need to add something in there, right? Yeah, Google Doc it
Yep.
and fill it out. That's what I've done. I've had them send Discord messages to me as well. And then yeah, have a set of these things that you don't do, because you need, in order to prevent those misunderstandings down the road in the game, they need to be upfront to begin with. Uh,
Right.
so I think that's one of the best ways. I know you were kind of talking about the when we were prepping for this, you were talking about the X card. A lot of tables have also started bringing in the X card.
Yeah, the X card is just, I understand the purpose and the intention, and it's got good intention behind it. I just think it's a little over the top. I prefer your method of just all the players anonymously sending their lines and veils to the GM. And because here's another problem I have with the X card. Some people have lines that they probably, for one reason or another, do not want everybody to know about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it may be something traumatic from their past, their real
Yeah,
life past. The group doesn't need to know about it. They don't want to bring it up. So I kind of feel like with an X card, as soon as you pop up an X card, you have basically just told everybody at that table what your line or your veil is,
yeah,
and really what your
yeah.
line is.
I feel like, I mean, there's a point in time that I think an X card is okay. If it wasn't talked about in the lines and veils, and all of a sudden you start to get really uncomfortable,
Yep.
I personally think if it's getting to that point, before it gets to that, I'm gonna try to inform the GM in some way, sending them a note, text messaging them real quick, something like, "Hey, this is making me uncomfortable. Can we please go a different direction?"
Yep.
And then I think it is on the storyteller to, okay, nobody's going to be upset about that. The X card itself, I do find is really distracting, and I feel like it tends to bring more attention to the situation than what that person really wants. So I get the idea behind it, but I think it doesn't succeed at what it's supposed to do.
Well, and having said that, I agree with you. But having said that, if it works for somebody's group,
Yeah.
fantastic, go for it. If all of your lines and your veils are out in the open and you're with a group that you've been friends for a long time and you have trust in these people and they know you and you want to use the X cards because you don't mind them knowing when one of your lines is getting approached, fantastic, do the X card. I mean, this is just mine and Jeremy's opinions, on the X card. And the reason I bring this up is because on Reddit and other social media groups, I have seen a lot of people talk about, something traumatic from their past that they didn't want the group to know because they weren't playing in a group with friends. They were playing in an online group that they
Hmm.
joined. So they didn't want
Yeah.
the group. And I see that more often than I see people in groups of, I mean, because online playing is becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
That's what I see all the time now. And it's like, why would you want, to, you know, bring up and have the group know what your line is if you're playing with a group of strangers?
Now on that, what is really interesting is Foundry has a module, and I'm not for sure if any of the other BTTs do. But Foundry has a module where they have an X card module where what you can do is you click the button and an X pops up on the screen. Nobody knows who hit it. It's
Okay.
it's unanimous, and I think that would be a healthy way
Okay.
to do that
Now that I could
because
get
it's
on board with.
anonymous. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
That
because
I
it's
can get on
anonymous.
board with. Yep.
The second you're at a table or you don't have that anonymous capability, I think that it's as a storyteller, I if a player feels like they have to use an X card, by all means do it. But I'm not going to say, hey guys, I play with an X card system. Let me know if we're getting too close. Because again, I think that pulls all the attention to that person,
Hmm.
and then to me, I don't think it's a healthy way about it. But with that unanimous capability,
Yep.
I do find that could be a really useful tool. As in the ever growing market of the virtual tabletop. So I would love to see Roll20 and some others be able to use that.
Okay, my daughter was just messaging me. She's watching the stream saying that you are louder than I am. She has to turn the volume. So I'm just going to turn my
I'll
volume up
start talking
real quick.
quieter.
Yep. And let's see if that helps. Let me just turn my volume up just a little bit more. Okay. And we're having some audio challenges because I'm on a different headset than I normally use. So for some reason, my normal headset I couldn't get to use, so I had to use this other headset, and I think that's why we're having some volume difficulties. So hopefully that's a lot better. Um, so I want to talk about at this point, Jeremy. with everything we've talked about, one of the ways to really grasp the value of everything we talked about here is to consider the opposite of them. Okay.
Okay.
So, what happens if we do the opposite of assuming positive intent or committing a fundamental attribution error or, not paying attention to people's lines and veils? Well, or creating space. So, number one, if you react immediately and don't give any consideration to the situation, to what you're saying, how you're saying it, you could inadvertently start a fight and you risk ending friendships and ending a game.
Yeah.
Um,
Just
so,
going I
yep.
was gonna say, going along with that, I mean, I one of my longtime friends, we'd been
Mhm.
playing for almost 10 years at this point. He just dropped out of our group, and we kind of told him he's not allowed back for the moment as well. Uh, Same thing.
Wow.
The really, really big fight came out. We haven't really spoken since. And a lot of it comes down to these things right here: the assuming positive intent and
Mhm.
the fundamental attribute. And then
Mhm.
there was no and then on top of all that, we didn't create space. And then when we came back to the topic, there was still a lot of, we still weren't assuming positive intent and kind of went south.
Yeah. And that goes into the next point I was going to bring up. I mean, the number of stories I've read online about I mean, games have ended, campaigns have ended, friendships have ended, all because somebody misunderstood something somebody else said or did, and
Mm-hmm.
they took it personally. And really, in a nutshell, everything that we're talking about here just boils down to one thing: just don't take things personally. You know
Yeah.
what? It's if when you take things personally, that's what causes a lot of problems.
So I will say, in the amount of time I've played, when you're playing with people that you're not as close to,
Hmm.
the games where I've only known people for a few months or a few weeks, uh, it's typically a lot easier to do a lot of these things, the assuming positive intent,
Hmm.
uh, the fundamental attribute. But when you've known the person and you've played with them for a decade, 5 years, an extended period of time, you start to you stop giving them those things.
Yep, I can see what you're saying. Yep, yep. It makes perfect sense. Why? Because when we first meet somebody, we got to put on a front.
Yep.
We're on our
Yeah.
best behavior. So when we first
Yeah.
meet people.
Yeah. I feel like, I mean, just with assuming positive intent, when you first meet somebody, you're going to try to assume that they're not trying to ruin your fun. But say this person has accidentally ruined your fun once before, and then they start to do the kind of the same thing leading up to it. Now you're all of a sudden, you're no longer assuming positive intent. You're like, well, you did it once and you're doing it again.
Yep,
It you're basically you're playing off of former knowledge that you're still not doing everything correctly, and you're just not following the basic human things right here, which is
yep,
what we've kind of been going over.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeremy, I think that's all, everything I had on this. And why don't we do a quick recap on everything we've talked about here? So once again, assuming positive intent, that's no matter what somebody says or does, just assume they meant well, they had no malicious intent, and did not mean anything, personal. Fundamental attribution error. That's attributing mistakes that you make on your circumstances while attributing somebody else's mistake, on their character. And a different way to actually word this, because I alluded to that earlier, there's different ways of wording the fundamental attribution error. It's one of the ways is holding yourself to one set of standards, holding somebody else to a higher set of standards, or
Mhm.
yet another way of looking at it is it's judging other people by their actions and yourself by your intentions.
Yeah.
So many different ways to look at that. And then creating space, and that's part of being proactive from the 7 habits of highly effective people. And it's choosing to create space between the stimulus, what happens, to your reaction to it, because in that space you've got the choice and the freedom to decide how you're going to um, react.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, why don't you do a quick recap on the lines and veils?
Yeah, so lines and veils is just kind of going
Mhm.
over the things that you should talk about before session zero. Even you should get them to the storyteller, GM, whoever is running the game. That way, going into session 0, everybody's going to know what the table's lines and veils are. That way, when you're making your character, you're not the barbarian that likes to run around and kill children, because
Right.
that might not be accepted. I've had a lizard man that liked to steal children, and yeah, that was okay at that table, but that was probably the only table I think that would be
Yeah.
acceptable at.
Yep.
And then something else I was just thinking about it, and I really want to touch on it real quick, is assuming positive intent. A lot of us watch like Critical Role and stuff like that. Something that I think would help a lot of gaming tables out is you always see them do the yes and,
Mhm.
right? So they assume that the person is coming from they want to do something effective for the group. How many games have you had where, as the second there's a planning stage, the game just almost shuts down as everybody's planning? I don't like your plan, and oh no, that plan's never going to work. This is why. Nobody's assuming positive intent, right? So what Critical Role does in a lot of really successful gaming and just people in general is the yes and. So somebody starts to come up with a plan, even if you don't really agree with it, assume that positive intent and just start building on it, right? The game's going to be way more fun if instead of you saying, I don't like that. Oh, I have a major echo. I don't know how to
Yep.
fix that.
Yeah, I don't know how to fix it either. So we're just having some tech issues tonight. We'll get this
Yeah,
figured out.
yeah,
So
we'll look at that in between this time and next one to see if we
yeah,
can figure that out.
see what's going on.
Yeah, but kind of going back on that. So it's
Mhm.
the game is going to be way more fun if we go into instead of me telling you why I don't like your idea and why it's not going to work, if instead I say, "Oh, that's what you want to do. I'm going to do this." Lindsay, epic. Yeah.
Angry Mom Gaming lends you that epic power voice. I love it.
I do have an epic voice.
Yeah.
So,
But I understand what you're saying. So instead of
yeah,
just saying your plan sucks, I hate it, we should do this, they just in Critical Role they just build on
yeah,
that
they
plan.
build it up, and like you see the table come together for these ridiculous moments, but the whole table piles in on it, right? And that's when it's almost magical, is when you see the table pile in on a ridiculous plan. Whether it works or doesn't work, everybody was all in on it, and therefore it's just super fun. So trying to get away from that idea of your plan sucks, this is why. If you guys really assume positive intent and start yes anding it, like
I like
I'm
it.
going to make a ghost to try to scare the guards. Oh, that's a terrible plan. Well, instead of that, what if you have your own illusion that you can pop up sounds, right? Well, now make the sounds of a ghost. Oh, I have gust of wind. I'm gonna make the trees nearby start to blow as
I
well.
love it.
Like
That's
yeah,
awesome.
as you start to pile in, all of a sudden
Yeah.
it gets good. And a bad plan, even if everybody's in on it, can be a lot of fun.
That's great. That's awesome. All right. Hey, it's fixed.
Yay! Maybe I just need to do epic voice.
All because Angry Mom Gaming lends you that epic power voice.
There we
So,
go.
as Jeremy alluded to earlier while we're wrapping this up, is that this advice is not just for your gaming group. This advice is for all of your relationships, um, real life, in your gaming group, everywhere. And it applies to family, friends, coworkers. Now, this isn't something that, people can just do, immediately. It takes intentionality. You
And it
have to
takes
focus
practice.
on it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes practice and you have to focus on it. But I can guarantee that for everybody who does these things, you will have better relationships inside your gaming table and outside your gaming
You'll be
table.
happier too.
Absolutely.
Just general happier.
Yep. So, Jeremy, do you remember what our next topic was going to be on? I meant to
Oh,
pull that up.
yep.
And what were we going to talk about?
We talked about something.
Yep.
I'm pulling it up real quick.
What was it? I had tech issues today. I was trying to iron out, so I wasn't totally prepared.
I checked over all my notes and I forgot to look on that before we did it.
I'm going to look through the notes too. Let me take a look here. Oh, I remember here it was. D&D is not a video game. Actions do have consequences.
I just got to it at the same time. So yeah,
All
next
right.
week we're gonna go over D&D is not a video game.
Right. Actions have consequences, but not next week. In 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Yep. All right. Oh, Reaper said 1,000%. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this one because I got some stories I can share with us, and I'm sure you do too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, want to thank everybody for joining us on this episode of The Other Side of the Die. We will be back in 2 weeks talking about D&D is not a video game. Actions do have consequences. Jeremy, you have any parting thoughts or pithy sayings or anything you want to throw out there?
It's all about tension to make the fun, and it's all about the fun.
There you go. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a
Signing
good
off.
one.
We'll see you later. Bye bye.
Bye.